This is the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast, brought to you by Heather Rose Jones. The show looks at lesbian and sapphic themes in history and literature, and historical fiction with queer female characters, including fantastic versions of the past. We present research, interviews, news of the field, book listings, and original historical fiction for your enjoyment. For even more historic research, check out our blog. Welcome to On the Shelf for December 2025. We made it to the end of another calendar year, which calls for some reflection. This was a significant year for me personally, what with retiring from my day job, which has meant being able to spend more time and energy on the Lesbian Historic Motif Project. That may not have been as apparent if you only listen to the podcast, but I've been able to blog 87 publications this year, compared to 32 last year. And I've made significant progress on the book version of the project, though there's still a lot of work to do before I can even think about a finish date. I've also gotten back to working on my fiction projects, as well as some other research and writing projects. Looking forward to next year, I'll be running the fiction series again, so spread the word that submissions will be open in January. As usual, see the show notes for a link to the call for submissions, which will tell you all you need to know. Next year, we'll see the podcast's 10th birthday in August, so I'll be thinking about something special to do for that. I have fantasies of maybe getting a special guest or two, but there's absolutely nothing concrete on that yet. I hope you have something special you're looking forward to, or that you can look back on with satisfaction. In news of the field, I've been asked to help publicize a new podcast, Our Dyke Histories, produced in collaboration with the respected lesbian literary journal Sinister Wisdom. The podcast will be hosted by historian, geographer, and environmental psychologist Jack Jen-Giesking, and will bring together historians, elders, artists, and everyday dykes to remember how bars, parties, bookstores, and basements became our sanctuaries. So, in other words, 20th century lesbian history to complement the pre-20th century history we cover on the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast. Season 1 traces the history of lesbian bars and various types of queer hangouts, from the 1920s tea rooms of Eve Adams to Harlem rent parties, from the Women's House of Detention to 1970s consciousness-raising collectives, and 1980s synthesizer-lit dance floors. Each episode explores turning danger into joy, censorship into art, and survival into community. Guests include a number of well-known figures whose names you're likely to recognize. Future seasons of the podcast will move decade by decade through other defining places, objects, and ideas in lesbian, bi, queer, and trans history, mapping the worlds we've made and the futures we're still imagining. The first few episodes of the podcast are already live, so follow the link in the show notes to check out the show. While blogging publications for the project, I'm currently aiming for 2 per week, which is what I achieved in November, continuing my practice of putting together thematic clusters. I've finished up a run of classical-oriented articles with Sarah Levin Richardson's Fututa Sum Hic, Female Subjectivity and Agency in Pompeian Sexual Graffiti, in case you ever wanted to know how to talk dirty in Latin. Plus Jay Walker's Before the Name, Ovid's Deformulated Lesbianism, discussing lesbian visibility within its purported invisibility in Iphis and Ianthe. After that, I collected a set of articles on theatrical cross-dressing and masquerades in early modern England. This included Terry Castle's Eros and Liberty at the English Masquerade, 1710-90, Beth Friedman Rommel's Breaking the Code Towards a Reception Theory of Theatrical Cross-Dressing in 18th Century London, and Jean E. Howard's Cross-Dressing, the Theatre and Gender Struggle in Early Modern England. I had a couple of articles on 17th century poet Catherine Phillips, Harriet Andreadis's Reconfiguring Early Modern Friendship, Catherine Phillips and Homoerotic Desire, and Renee Kramer's student paper, That Mysterious Remissed Not, Catherine Phillips' Unincorporated Fraternity, which wasn't quite as interesting as I'd hoped. Finally, I kicked off a new set of articles focused on Asian cultures, with Mark Stevenson and Wu Kun-kun's book, Homoeroticism in Imperial China, a sourcebook, which, as expected, was rather light on female material without entirely omitting the subject. But this theme will continue through December with some very interesting articles. No new book shopping for the blog, alas, but it gives me more time to work through the 100 or so journal articles I have in my files. Looking up the new and recent books to list in this podcast, I have a confession to make. I am utterly exhausted by trying to make fair and considered evaluations of which books are more likely than not to be generated using large language models, and which ones were written entirely by human beings. I have some personal guidelines I've been using to try to identify works that I don't care to promote, but I'm spending more and more time agonizing over whether those guidelines are fair and doing online research on bylines to get more information for my decisions. This makes me unhappy and grumpy. So I have a new policy. Going forward, the new book listings are explicitly a curated list based on vibes and my personal opinions about how the book fits into the intent of this podcast. This will have several consequences. The most trivial is that it means the data for tracking settings and topics of sapphic historicals will become less useful. But I haven't been doing that analysis for a couple of years anyway. More importantly, it means that books I might previously have included may be left out if I have questions about their origins or if the content doesn't fit in my parameters. I've already been doing some of that in omitting books that are more solidly on the erotica side and books where the historic elements are marginal. I know from author responses that my mention of a book has meant a lot to some people in this most niche of niche genres, but I can't keep on as I have been. I refuse to let good books be swamped by endless listings of titles that are almost certainly AI slop. But I also decline to spend increasing amounts of work to include titles that simply give that unfortunate appearance while being human written. If you are releasing a lesbian or sapphic historical that you would like to see mentioned on this show, or if you know of a book that should be included, and the book isn't coming out through an established publisher, then the surest way to be included is to contact me directly and provide publicity information for the title in a way that gives me confidence in the content. If I don't have that confidence, then I'll be using the rules of thumb I've established. These include things like, has the author released a large number of books in a short period of time? Does the book have a clearly AI-generated cover? Many human-written books these days have AI covers, but I don't think I've ever seen the reverse case. Does the author have an identifiable online presence other than book listings in Amazon? Does a sample of the text stand out as clearly human-written in style? Again, there's plenty of pedestrian prose written entirely by human beings, but if the text stands out as particularly well written, then I'm likely to overlook any other symptoms. If I omit a book, I am not making a strong claim that it was written using AI, particularly since I have other criteria for passing on a book. But I may be saying that it's taking me too much work to tell the difference, and I still can't guarantee that an AI book won't slip through on occasion. I repeat that I hate feeling like I have to do this, but something needed to give. That said, here are some new and recent releases. There are a few November books that only just came to my attention. Souviens by Aldwin Beckett falls in the uncanny valley of, are we calling this historical yet? Scotland, 1966. Cassandra's life undergoes a drastic change when she trades her bustling London lifestyle for the solitude of an old cabin in the Scottish Highlands. One winter night, she rescues a mysterious injured woman who seems to remember nothing of her past. They fall for each other, and their bond blossoms until the circumstances force them to face Souviens' hidden past and part ways in a manner that leaves both hearts scarred. Now it falls to Souviens to reveal herself fully to Cassandra, or her secrecy will forever obscure their future. Without Apology, Jane Smith No. 3, by Charlotte Taft from Empress Publications, is the third book in a series whose theme is abortion activism, but whose protagonist is a lesbian. There are two previous books in the series that didn't catch my eye, but you might want to check out first if this one sounds interesting. In this last book of the Jane Smith trilogy, the year is 1959. Jane is 45. She has survived Nazis and gendarmes, been jilted by an admiral's daughter, nearly lost her favorite student to an illegal abortion, found the love of her life, provided abortion care under men's noses for 2 decades, and confessed her secrets to the one whose judgment she feared most. I'm not entirely fond of the use of the word invert in the title of Inverts in a Violet Room by Peter Forrester, but it was definitely a historic term, at least in an earlier part of the 20th century. It isn't clear that this book falls within the parameters of the romance genre. Living discreetly as a couple in Whitstable, Kent, Eliza and Violet are outed by an anonymous letter, forcing them to flee to Wembury, Devon, where they rebuild a quiet life by the sea. Violet is recruited into naval intelligence and becomes a covert operative in occupied France, while Eliza serves as a teacher and ARP warden during the Plymouth Blitz. Their separation is marked by danger, longing, and resilience. Eliza finds solace with Margaret, a fellow teacher and refugee on St. Michael's Mount, forming a new life in Cornwall. Violet, working as a double agent within the Nazi regime, survives a violent ambush before D-Day, forever changed. Decades later, after Margaret's death, there is a chance meeting. Whispers of the Heart, Lady Eleanor's Secret by Rhea Campos, has a bit of a gothic feel with family secrets, past tragedies, and a sense of claustrophobia. When Lady Eleanor Hawthorne discovers a locked ledger in her late mother's writing desk, she expects sentimental mementos, not secrets intertwined with scandal, philanthropy, and danger. The elegant world of Regency society tells her to be obedient, silent, and dutiful, but Eleanor has never been good at accepting cages. Everything changes the morning she meets Miss Charlotte Harwood, her sister's new governess, a quietly self-possessed young woman armed with keen intelligence, disarming wit, and a sadness she refuses to explain. Eleanor is drawn to her immediately in a way that feels far from proper, and far too dangerous. Gossip grows in the servants' hall. Shadows circle the Hawthorne estate, and when Eleanor uncovers a letter warning of betrayal from someone within her own household, she realizes her mother's death was no simple tragedy. Soon Eleanor and Charlotte are swept into a clandestine society of women risking their lives to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Blackmail, treachery, and scandal lurk behind every glittering ballroom door. As their connection deepens into something tender and undeniable, Eleanor must choose between the life society demands and the truth her heart can no longer ignore. December books start off in the Italian Renaissance with Hiding the Flame by Angela M. Sims from Romance Books. Florence, 1497, a city ablaze with religious fear, a woman forced to hide her art, and a love so dangerous it could cost her everything. Francesca Rossini, a gifted but silenced painter, lives under the strict rule of her husband, a man whose devotion to Savonarola's puritanical revolution leaves no room for beauty, tenderness, or truth. While bonfires of the vanities burn paintings, books, and anything deemed sinful, Francesca keeps her talent locked away like a forbidden flame. Then she meets Vittoria, a merchant's wife with a bold gaze and a quiet courage that unsettles Francesca's careful obedience. What begins as admiration becomes a connection too powerful to ignore, a forbidden love that awakens Francesca's spirit, her artistry, and her longing for a life she has never dared imagine. But Florence is a city where secrets are dangerous, and desire is deadly. As the firestorm of religious extremism grows, Francesca must choose between the life she knows and the truth that's calling her. It looks like we have a second chance romance in On the Edge of Uncertainty by Evie Bancroft from Butterworth Books. Florence Cooper has spent most of her life caring for her niece, Cam Langley. Now she shares a house with her niece and Cam's beautiful girlfriend, Gloria Edwards. But at 55, arthritis is slowing Florrie's body and solitude is settling on her soul. On Gloria's graduation day, a chance meeting with the woman who broke Florrie's heart over 30 years ago throws chaos and confusion into her life, forcing her to take a trip down memory lane into 1920s literary London. Old wounds reopen and long-buried feelings reignite, pulling Florrie into a life she thought long drowned. Standing once more on the edge of uncertainty, Florrie must decide, dive into the ocean of possibilities or swim for the safety of the shore. Brought to Heel by Ella Witz and Sarah Messenger from Brightwood Tales mixes Victorian Gothic vibes with supernatural menace and secret societies. Alex Hawthorne has grown up in the shadows, waiting for the day she is allowed to take her place in the secretive and mysterious organization that her family serve, the Order of Athena, an organization dedicated to protecting London from the shadows themselves. When her closest friend is murdered, Alex's pursuit of the killer not only puts her at odds with the Order, but threatens her very future in it. Thea Loftus is the daughter of an earl, struggling to find herself under the weight of both her family's and society's expectations. Everything changes when a near brush with death and London's newest demon catapults her into Alex's dark world. As the two girls chase answers through the bloody streets, macabre carnivals, and gilded ballrooms, they must not only confront the chilling truth behind the attacks, but the growing intensity of their bond. A different type of dark menace is hinted at in Pearlbound by Natalie Bergman from Rose and Pearl Productions. Eve Kelly, a young Irish immigrant, arrives with her mother to work at Greythorn, the sprawling estate of the powerful Renard family. Born into servitude, but restless with a force she cannot name, Eve is drawn into the orbit of Saskia Renard, the family's magnetic and dangerous daughter. What begins as attraction quickly becomes entanglement, pulling Eve into a world where wealth masks cruelty, gender dictates roles, and love outside the rules is a dangerous rebellion. And what have I been reading in the last month? Unusually, it hasn't been all audiobooks, thanks to a couple of advanced reading copies I was sent. But first, we have a whole string of SFF audio works. I've brought my tour through Martha Wells' Murderbot series to a finish by re-listening to Network Effect, and then finishing up with System Collapse. Back when Network Effect was my first introduction to the series, I felt overwhelmed by the proportion of blow-by-blow action scenes. Not really my thing. Which is why it took watching the TV series to decide to give the books another try. This time around, I appreciated all the interpersonal stuff in Network Effect, since I was more invested in the characters and was better able to keep track of them all. But System Collapse went back to feeling like it was wall-to-wall action without the emotional and psychological aspects that I'm looking for. Kate Elliott's The Witch Roads starts off with a slow build, but really grabbed me once the world building was established. While the setting isn't fully queer normative in the sense of nobody cares, there's a lot of gender and sexuality diversity in the cast that plays a plot role without being the main focus. The story both comes to a natural pause before the sequel, while also feeling like a bit of a cliffhanger. Fortunately, the sequel, The Nameless Land, just came out, so I'll put it on my Libby want list. Niveau's Singing Hills cycle, featuring a non-binary monk in an alternate China traveling to collect stories, has a new installment, A Mouthful of Dust, which focuses on famine and how hunger destroys social norms. While some books in this series have queer elements, I don't recall any in this one. It's very much on the horror side, similarly to the previous book in the series. I was provided with an advanced review copy of Amy's historical novel Raised for the Sword, and you can find my review at Goodreads and Amazon. It's set during the 16th century wars of religion in France, packed with history and following at least 2 different sapphic couples. I also was provided with an advanced copy of Janelle M. Ferreira's newest work titled Ochre, Quartz, or Ivy. I've sent her a blurb, but won't say anything further here as the book is not released yet. And now, we have an interview with Maya Dworsky-Rocha to talk about her story, Ma'am, This is a Fruit Stand, which aired last week. I invited Maya Dworsky-Rocha on the show to talk about her story, Ma'am, This is a Fruit Stand, which aired on the show last week. Welcome, Maya.
Hello.
So I talked a little in the intro to the story last week about how the humor of the title caught my attention before I ever read it. I don't get a lot of humorous submissions. But afterward, on considering, the Wendy's meme that it comes from, and I saw a connection between that and the idea of customers who are bringing their inappropriate desires and discourse into a transaction.
Yes.
Power differentials. So did I interpret the title correctly?
No, that is exactly right. This whole story is about power differentials.
So when we discussed the story back at the beginning of the year, you were interested in placing it in the context of historic anti-Semitism and goblin imagery and how Jews have been gendered or ungendered in Gentile literature. And I thought I would just push your start button and let you talk about that.
Thank you so much. The first thing I would start with is talking about the term anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, as we think about it today, has only existed for about 200 years. Long before that, we had what was called Judenphobia, or fear of Jews. hate of Jews. Anti-Semitism really has only been around since around the time this poem, around the 19th century. So I am going to keep using it as we talk, but I'm not referring to just the concept of anti-Semitism, just modern anti-Semitism, but the long storied history of Jewish hatred. So as we know, Christina Rossetti was really into medieval imagery and sort of that entire aura that the pre-Raphaelites were into. And a huge part of the medieval milieu was this hatred of Jews, this fear of Jews, this sort of goosebumps type fear of Jews as an everyday specter, as an everyday scary thing that you could encounter. And so much of that fear is also bound up with gender transgression. So there's so much about Jewish culture that goes against what Christianity considers right and true and correct. And a huge part of that is gender. Throughout different Jewish communities and Jewish history, the gender binary has played out very differently. First of all, it is not necessarily a binary. We know that in the Talmud, there are over 6 different genders that people can claim and inhabit. But the cisgenders, the one we would consider male and female, had very different roles compared to their Christian counterparts. So in Christian and Western society, the mother, the woman is controls the home. She is the domestic goddess, and the man goes out and explores the world. In most Jewish societies, especially during this period, which was a lot of the shtetl era, it was women who spoke the language of the country. They were the ones who would leave the home. The men would stay in, they would study, they would connect with God. And it was women who would interact and interface with the dominant culture. So already you had this breaking of gender expectations. Men were sissies. There's a wonderful piece by Daniel Boyarin, which is about sissy heritage of Jewish men. And women, Jewish women, oh, what a complicated relationship we have with them. Jewish women are both masculine, but never in a good way, right? Not in the sort of fun masculinity gives you power way, but in the way that makes you just unfeminine. Jewish women are unfeminine. They have all of the greed of Jewish men, but they also have the misogyny sort of massaged in there of being this insatiable monster, the monster seductress, right? There's all of that going on as well. The Jewish seductress, the beautiful Jewess, the destructive Jewess is something that is found all throughout Western literature. And it is this ungendered monster that sort of combines with the male Jew. That's one of the reasons it was so important for me to have a non-gendered protagonist and their non-gendered or non-binary gendered love interest, because the whole point of Jewish queer is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are a male or a female or intersex, you will be perceived as wrong. So the connections there, specifically with the monsters of sort of anti-Semitism, the tropes that you come back to. So you've got the monster seductress, the Jewish seductress. You've got the buggering Jew. It's sort of the male version of that. You'll have the Jewish sissy who turns good Christian men to queerness. There's also the just the general Jewish monster who can be a male, who can be a female, but who eats children. So Laura and Lizzie in this story, they are women, they are girls, they're also children. And we see this reversal of eating where the girls are coming to eat the fruits of the goblin men, who in turn, as we see, especially what they go for with Laura, is they're going to eat them back. The idea is they are going to eat them back. There's going to be this consumption that happens. So with when it goes from Christian to Jew, the consumption is considered a temptation. It is considered an impurity. It's how you are ruined by the corrupting Jewishness that offers you something you already wanted, obviously, but if you hadn't come across it, you never would have fallen. But in response, the assumption is always that there will be a returning consumption, that you will be consumed in turn by the Jewish monster, by the queer, that nothing is for free. There's an inherent transaction that's going to happen here, and it will be your soul. There's a wonderful, heartbreaking book called The Devil and the Jews by Joshua Trachtenberg, that really gets into this dynamic, and it really sort of takes you from the very beginning, from the first medieval story about a Christian child being eaten up by Jews, and tracks it throughout Europe, and also the population migrations that happen throughout Europe, and how these stories of devils and fairies and queerness all sort of get mashed together into this general concept of the darkness. In the same way that men will project their darkness onto women, white people project their darkness onto non-white people. The same thing happens with Christianity and Jewishness. It's just been happening for a very long time, and it has taken many, many different forms throughout. It was already taking a different form when when Rossetti was writing this story. She was hearkening back to an earlier time, to an earlier version of this hatred, as a way to sort of spice up the new version.
That is so fascinating. We had talked about it in advance, and I am so happy that you got a chance to provide this background. And I know we discussed earlier that it made more sense to give it after the story so that people can experience the story as it is, and then go back and say, oh, yeah, there are these other things going on. And you mentioned briefly about the gender of the characters. And that's another interesting thing about the story, that it's a sapphic story. I mean, it has to be a sapphic story, or I wouldn't have accepted it for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't about sapphicness. And one could see the sapphic aspect as coming entirely from the Rossetti poem, of saying, here is this poem that has the sapphic imagery in it, and we are taking that as the theme that we're going to attach these other things to. But because of the context in which the story is being presented, I know that my reflexive reaction, and I think a lot of listeners' reflective reactions, is going to assume that the relationship between Fig Rose and Applegold is also a sapphic relationship, even though one of them is a first-person narrator and the other one is always referred to in non-binary terms. So discuss.
Oh, absolutely. Happily. That is part of what I was trying to play with in the story. So much of what Christianity, and I don't just mean Christianity, but Western society and the specific type of Western white queerness, it purports to have this uniqueness. It's like this, there's nothing like this out there. And my intent was to show, here's this incredibly sapphic love. There's yearning, like, it's truly sapphic, in that Fig Rose has been yearning for Applegold all these years, and Applegold is slowly, and Applegold knows this, and they have this dynamic that is, I mean, every baby lesbian knows what's going on. We've all been there, which is why I think Fig Rose moment of solidarity with Lizzie is so, like, not solidarity, but sort of recognition that they have with Lizzie is just, this is everywhere. This kind of love, this kind of longing, this kind of queerness is everywhere. And the fact that for them, in order to experience, in order for Lizzie and Laura to indulge to be corrupted, they had to project it onto fig rose and apple gold. There had to be this removal. The devil made me do it, right? This removal of the desire onto the fruit, onto the goblins, onto the Jews, onto someone else, so that the desire can be indulged, but doesn't have to be held, doesn't have to be admitted to. So for fig rose and apple gold, they've got their own thing going on. It's complicated, it's gay, it's queer, it's lesbian, but they don't need other people to carry it for them. So you have, and white queerness, Western queerness, Christianity, Christian queerness, whatever you call it, has this very, very long history of appropriation, as we know. Like there's this constant, well, I'm actually two-spirit. Well, there's all these different ways that because Christianity rejects the queer rejects Christianity sometimes. And there's a void there. There's an absence that is then filled in a way that has been learned from home, right? There's a recreation of the same patterns.
Historically, another dynamic is that Western culture has habitually, and this actually goes all the way back to the Roman Empire, has habitually displaced queerness onto the other and said, this is a thing that exists, but not here, not now, not us. It's those folks over there. And this recurs throughout the centuries over and over again. It's like, it's the Greeks, it's the North Africans, it's the Turks, it's the French if you're English,
Exactly.
Always somewhere else. It's their fault. They have brought this contamination into our culture, which was never here before.
Exactly. So you have that dynamic in this story, as much as I can, when we can be filthy goblins we can be filthy goblins together, or when Apple Gold at the end talks about seeing yourself through goblin eyes, that's what they're referring to. You can see yourself through us. That is what the elder is warning of at the beginning of the story. We're like, you become a door. You become a reflection for them. That's how humans, that's how the powerful use you and your queerness. They take you, they see themselves in you, and you are used in that action.
Always glad when I get stories that go beyond the simple, girl meets girl, and that will make people think and remember the story for a long time. So, anything else you're working on that you'd like to tell us about?
Yes, I actually do most of my work as a part of a co-authoring duo. I do have my own short stories here and there, but my biggest work is as part of Sylvia Barry, Barry, and we write queer romance novels, published by Riptide Publishing. We have a book out that is called Lessons in Timing. It came out last year. And we have the sequel, Lessons in Balance, coming out on December 22nd. You can find me at sylviabarrybooks.com. I'm a little bit hidden on that website. You can go looking for Easter eggs. It's kind of fun. Mostly you'll find out about Sylvia Barry. Sylvia Barry is a 7-foot-tall witch who lives in a lighthouse. Very sapphic herself. I'm on TikTok, mostly talking about Star Trek. I'm at Maya D. Rocha. Don't do much on Blue Sky, but I'm also on there as Maya D. Rocha. Drop by and say hi.
So I will put links to all of those in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It's rare that we get to talk about these things.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast. See the show notes for links to people and topics. Most shows will have a transcript linked as well. If you have a book announcement, a topic suggestion, or might like to appear on the show, please drop me an email. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and consider supporting our Patreon.